Hello everyone and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. The footage in the background for today comes from Guild Wars Insider, who have been recently uploading B-roll footage of their experience as a human, going through the human stuff. That's in the background. There'll be a link down in the description below. And yeah, I got two things to say really before we go into the questions. First, one thing I wanted to mention from a previous video, the last mechanics one we did. I talked a lot about daily things and those being able to keep the game alive and how cool Nicholas the Traveller, that whole system was in Guild Wars 1. And how I think that ArenaNet would be pretty stupid to leave it out of Guild Wars 2. Well, a lot of you guys mentioned actually the achievement system kind of has room for this in Guild Wars 2. Every day there'll be different things you can do which will give you a certain reward for it, and that is a good point, and that is something that hopefully people will be compelled to log into the game every day and then they'll be able to play those. So you'll be tasked with killing a certain variety of enemies or killing a certain amount of enemies or doing various things like that, but I still think that a Nicholas the Traveller type system still would work quite well, because that feat system, the achievement system, that part of it that's doing that really seems to be a mechanic more towards helping casual players to keep up with their friends if they only have a smaller amount of time to play during the day, because they'll get that experience bonus, while people just grinding out for 12 hours when the game comes out will lose that. So I think that's what that system's aimed towards, while the Nicholas the Traveller type thing they were doing with the unique items rather than just experience rewards or just gold rewards offers a lot more in the way of unique items, and also the task you have to do each day can also be a lot more varied and a lot more interesting, which hopefully will be more motivating for people and maybe even hold their attention for a lot longer when they actually get in the game. So I think there's actually room for both, but yes, it's very true that the achievement system does have something there in place already, which is good because it shows ArenaNet have been thinking about this kind of thing as you'd expect them to. Also, the other thing, just wanted to mention, this is now our 1 month of having done Guild Wars 2 Daily. When I started this, I was kind of curious how long I'd be able to keep it up, and there were a few days where I almost didn't put out a video. But yeah, this has been a bit of a milestone for me. I just wanted to mention that. I think it's been an awesome month, and hopefully the others continue to be really, really cool. That means we've done, like, if we just assume I did 2 questions a day, that means we've already answered 60 questions, and yeah, hopefully we can answer a lot more before the game actually releases. But anyway, yeah, so enough of that boring stuff. Let's start off. The first question was asked by Shines88, who said, here's my mechanics question. Since melee combat depends on hit detection, where a swing doesn't guarantee a hit, do the different races have different hit boxes? For instance, does a Norn warrior swinging around a giant greatsword have a larger hit radius than an Asura warrior doing the same thing? I can't imagine it would, since it would give the Norns a nice advantage, but I'd still like to know for sure. Well, no, they've tried to keep it as balanced as they possibly can. If anybody's going to take the PvP seriously, but also allow players to just choose whatever race they want to play, this is something that they'll have to be careful about. So, for anybody who doesn't know, okay, a hitbox is like, imagine an invisible box, literally, inside your character model. It's completely separate from the way your character looks, and if a skill effect or an attack ever touches this box, then that means that your character takes the damage. So if your character was stood there in the middle of a dance animation and his arms were outspread, and then somebody attacked just where that arm was, it wouldn't actually do the damage to the person, because that's not where the hitbox is extended to. And some games try and match the hitbox perfectly up to the character model, which means that the bigger the character, the easier it is to hit because there's a larger hitbox, and the smaller character, the harder it is to hit. ArenaNet have tried to avoid that, and they've made it so that even a massive Norn has got the exact same size hitbox as a small Asura, and that's purely for balance. That's to make sure that not everybody's rolling Asura because they're harder to hit and it's more difficult for people to land their skill shots. So that's what they're doing there, and that is their attempt at making sure these things balance. There are still problems there though, because the hitbox is invisible. So a small Asura still has the advantage that it will be harder for a player to pick them out in the landscape, and it will be easier for an Asura to get away from certain situations just because they're smaller. I'm not really sure how ArenaNet could deal with something like that. That certainly seems to me like if you're going to try and eliminate that as well, you're talking about just making PvP a single race all the time. But hey, the really competitive games end up doing that kind of thing. My first experience with this kind of discussion came from when I used to play Halo, and I'm not saying that's a particularly competitive game, but I remember all the MLG game types and anything that tried to take itself very seriously would only allow you to play as Spartans and not elites, and that was simply because even though there was such a small difference between these two characters, people wouldn't like that it threw the balance off. Now, admittedly, the hitboxes were slightly different in that situation, but still, size, you see it happen. In other MMOs, you see people always playing the smaller races, and I'm wondering if that will come forward with Guild Wars 2 or not. But for the most part, Arena now, I think, have been quite smart about it, and they've done what they feasibly can. They've made sure that all the hitboxes are the same size. If there's a fence, and there's an Asura stood behind the fence, and there's a Norn stood behind the fence, and you're against them, and you can see that Norn's head, and you try and shoot something at the Norn's head, not that the skills seem to be that specifically targeted, but if you were to try and do that, it wouldn't hit the Norn just as much as it wouldn't hit the Asura. But there is the advantage that you know the Norn's there, and you might not know that the Asura is. So we'll have to see how it goes. It's not really something that I'm worried will skewer the game's chances of becoming truly competitive. What you mentioned actually in your question about different races having a longer reach on weapons isn't even something I'd really considered, and that's certainly not something they're doing either for the same reason. So yeah. The next question was asked by Pinovcliff, who said, all the videos that I've seen have their UI the same. Will we be able to customize the UI in Guild Wars 2 like we could in Guild Wars 1? Well, they've said before that there will be customization. Guild Wars 1's customization of the UI was amazing. It was really, really good. They never allowed you to do third-party things, but you could take any element of the UI that you wanted, you could turn it completely off, you could shrink it down, you could do pretty much everything except rotate it. You could move it anywhere you wanted and have it any size, and you could do some really interesting things. And a lot of the UI elements, like the skill bar, would actually, if you scaled it to a certain size, it would take on a different appearance. So instead of having like 8 skills side by side, you could have 4 above and 4 below, and it was really, really quite good. I very much enjoyed that about Guild Wars 1. I've talked before on Guild Wars 2 Daily about how I started to play with my compass turned off, so I can see enemies on the minimap. Stuff like that was brilliant, and it was always a lot of fun to be able to do that and make your UI way more immersive and turn off the clutter that you didn't really think needed to be there. Guild Wars 2, they've said that something similar, they have said before that something similar would be happening with the game, but we haven't seen that so far. So far in the footage, as far as I'm aware, all we've had is the option to make your interface large, in which case it will be very obtrusive and annoying, but I suppose helpful for some people. You can make it normal, which is the default setting, or you can make the UI small, and all of the UI elements will scale to fit that. There are certain bits of the UI you can turn on or off, like for example, if you're looting someone, you'll get a little loot window if you're not using auto loot, this is, and you can choose to turn that on or off if you want, and there are certain things like that. You can have the party window, like a basic version or a more advanced version, but for the most part, the customization is nowhere near as extensive as it was in Guild Wars 1. I do, however, chalk this up to the fact that the UI is probably still being worked on and iterated on like mad, as UIs usually are, and that will probably be one of the final touches. Once they know generally what everything they want to be on the UI is and how it's all going to look, then they'll start working on letting players mess around with it for themselves. So I do think that we'll get more customization as time comes along. The important thing to note, though, for Guild Wars 2 is that there's not going to be any third-party stuff. Some MMOs open up third-party stuff and you get ridiculous add-ons that some people love and some people hate, but with Guild Wars 2 they've just decided that's not really something that they want the community to have to deal with. They don't want certain people having certain advantages because they went and did something outside of the game, and they're going to try and keep it, I'm hoping, the same as it was in the first game, which really was very serviceable and didn't add any unnecessary complications that we the players had to deal with. So that's kind of what they're doing there. The last question was asked by Masaru Mirai. I swear I've said all of these names wrong today. Kind of a silly question here. Is it possible to rebind your skill slots? I usually rebind 1 to 5 or 6 to 0 on me to Q, E, R, T, F, G and so forth because it's convenient. Is this possible in Guild Wars 2? Yes, I've had a lot of questions about this, which is really why I'm coming for this one now. You can rebind your skills, you certainly can, and that was something you could do in Guild Wars 1 as well. You could rebind it to whatever the hell you wanted. I've already talked about how the actual position of the skills on your skill bar can't be moved, but this is actually something interesting you could do. If that really annoys you and you want like your skill 5 on your skill 1 slot, you could always just rebind the skills so that skill 5 was activated by 1 on the keyboard. You could do that if you wanted. So that's not off the table, but one feature a lot of people want that to this day I don't think we've had any word on being in the game is the ability to add function keys, if you will. So I can press 1 to activate my skill 1, like my weapon skill 1, but I can hold control and press 1 1, and that will do my self-heal, and so on all the way across the bar. That would be a really cool feature, and you see that a lot in other MMOs, but it's not something that ArenaNet have talked about being in Guild Wars 2, which a lot of people are kind of upset about. Obviously, these are the kind of things that you can then go off and set up macros for and stuff, but really, I do feel like the game would do well for itself if it actually offered that to us. The main thing, though, I'd say, and I think is probably going through ArenaNet's head if they don't end up adding something like this in, is the fact that Guild Wars 2 is using a 10 skill bar system. Guild Wars 1 never had this either. It was using an 8 skill bar system. There are some MMOs where they famously say you have more skills than you could possibly bind to keys. Guild Wars 2 isn't going to be anything like that, and I think that simply because of the fact we're now in a 10 bar system, the need for that feature is actually diminished somewhat. Some of you might be sitting there and desperate for it because you're used to it in all your other MMOs, but when you get in game, you might find it's actually not something you're really thinking about anymore because it's pretty easy to access everything. I personally have got an MMO mouse that's got lots of buttons on the side, and I'll just be using that, and I can't wait, and it should be really, really fun. My main concern with controls is, I think I've said it before, W, A, S, and D, and then your most frequent skills are going to be on 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as a result of that, it might be a little bit annoying moving your fingers all over the place like that. But hey, I'm not actually going to have to worry about that because all my skill usage will be with my right hand, and all my movement will be with my left hand. But yeah, it's something that people have been asking for. I do still think it could be something that would be good for the game, but at the same time, we should be aware that maybe it's not as essential as you might be expecting. Anyway, there we go, guys. Thank you very much for watching Guild Wars 2 Daily. If you've got any other questions for me, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And I guess I'll see you tomorrow for the start of another month. See you later.